Yeah, like I think the concern is always, is there anything in this legislation that we don't know about?
Right.
Because we haven't read it.
So then... All right, Allison McMurter, we are doing this again. Welcome to the studio. Welcome to my new studio.
I know. I like it.
Yeah?
It's very lovely.
Yeah, it's a little more intimate. Yes. Got the red chairs.
I like this chair.
Yeah?
This chair makes me feel very important. So that's fun.
Yeah, good. Well, as long as you feel important, that's the most important thing in here.
Yes.
And how have you been though? How are things? How's business?
Good. Everything's going well.
Yeah.
Yep. We're like everyone in the industry, just going with the flow at this point, adapting as things change and recover and recess. And we're just seeing what happens next. But we have been doing this for a very long time. So it's not our first ebb and flow. So I think we're good.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, your dad, he's been doing it for a very long time as well, too.
Yeah.
So you've learned obviously a lot from him. And
yes. He had experienced the 80s and 90s in real estate. So
right. Yeah.
We have a long-term view.
Is he saying this is similar or is it different?
It's different, but there's similarities.
Okay.
So I think that, sort of helps us see it with a wider lens.
Right.
To see this is not necessarily, an earth-shattering, unique experience that industry professionals have.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is similar, but different.
Yeah.
But we'll get out of this.
Yeah.
We will survive.
All the other ones have recovered. So,
right.
And again, the volume, we don't, because we're closing deals, we're not so much looking at price point and things like that, or listing numbers and all of that. We're just looking at closing volume.
Mm-hmm.
So from the perspective of closing volume, I think that the current year so far has been, it's been, an improvement over last year in some ways, and not so dissimilar from pre-COVID years in a lot of ways.
Okay. So the reason why I have you here today, because I want to dive into this new HST rebate that Doug Ford recently came out with. Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of buzz around that. And I think there's obviously the reason they did it was to try to spark obviously in either whether it be investors or first-time home buyers, or even to get the developers to start building again, right?
I think that was a big aim as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really the main push there, is to get the developers to actually start digging again and getting inventory, because I think they realize that we're going to be in trouble in the next couple of years with no new housing starts, or very little.
Yeah, they're thinking about 2028 and 2029 in a way that the average home buyer is not. Mm-hmm. And if the developers are not writing the contracts now, then the supply in those coming years is going to be not what we need, not sufficient.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden now you're right back into a very fast moving upward market where all of a sudden the prices now are
that's the concern, I think. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into it then. So what is this whole new HST rebate?
Yeah.
How does it work? It is pretty new.
The approach is much different than what the federal and provincial governments have been doing with HST on new builds historically. Okay. So again, I'm not an accountant, so I will not be claiming to give any accounting advice. However, from the perspective of a lawyer, what we have seen historically, and I think the important premise to start with is that new builds are subject to HST. Mm-hmm. So we're very used to, I think the average home buyer especially is very used to resale homes, and they are exempt from HST. So the general idea is all property exchanges in Ontario are subject to HST unless they have an exemption. Okay. So our primary residences, the majority of residential properties are exempt. So when we get into new builds, they are one of the only real sectors of residential real estate that is consistently subject to HST. Right. So then between the builders and the buyers, everyone has to figure out how to deal with that HST. So the current program which is the name is the GST HST new housing rebate, often just called the new housing rebate. So what it does currently is it will rebate up, so most builds in Ontario, because of our price points, are eligible for $24,000 in HST rebate currently under the system they had before this month.
Okay.
So what that has meant in the contracts for the buyers and the builders is that when the builders are pricing the homes, they are assuming they are going to receive the $24,000. So if they wanted to sell a home for $924,000, they would offer it to the buyer for $900,000.
Okay.
$900,000.
Yeah.
Yes. So what it would look like in the contract is the purchase price would be $900,000 on the first page of the contract where they indicate that. And then buried deep in the contract is a very long HST section. So in that section, what the lawyers for the builders who are very, very good at their jobs typically write is that the purchase price is inclusive of HST, net of the HST new housing rebate.
Okay.
So really, the purchase price is $924,000, but the builder is assuming they're going to get the $24,000 from the government. So what they say in that big long paragraph is that as long as you, the buyer, qualify for the new housing rebate, you only owe us $900,000. Basically, what they're going to do on closing is they're going to show the buyer as owing the additional $24,000 on their statement of adjustments, but then they're going to show a credit right after for the $24,000. So it just cancels it out.
Got it.
And then after closing, they get the rebate back from the government. So for buyers who don't qualify for the new housing rebate, so the ways that people get disqualified would be if they're not moving in as their primary residence, or an immediate family member can also make you qualify. And there's all sorts of nitty gritty to that, like some of the things that have caught people up with disqualifications from the rebate. So for instance, I was buying a home and I needed someone to co-sign on my mortgage. And rather than an immediate family member as defined by the legislation, I have a very kind aunt who agrees to co-sign for me. I unfortunately would probably not immediately qualify for the new housing rebate because my aunt can't say that an immediate family member is going to occupy the property as their primary residence because aunt and niece are not on the list. So there is some technicality to it. But the general idea, as long as the buyers qualify for the new housing rebate, the builder will not charge them the $24,000. They'll get them to sign the application to get it back from the government at closing, and then the builder will get it back.
Okay.
If for some reason the builder gives the credit and then the buyer fails to qualify, so the buyer says, oh, yes, we're going to move in, absolutely. And then, the week after closing, they list it for sale. Well, the rebate application is going to be denied. So then there is still a debt between the buyer and the builder in that case, but it gets much more complicated for the builder to actually pursue it.
Okay.
So anyway, the new system.
Okay.
They're framing it actually rather than an entirely new rebate. They're framing it as an expansion of eligibility under the new housing rebate. So they don't have to redo the whole system. They don't have to redo the whole legislation, which is, a better approach logistically, I think.
Right.
So rather than being limited for most homes to that $24,000, they can now claim the entire 13%.
Okay. So 13% of whatever the purchase price of that home is. Up to $1 million.
Yes.
And that's a sliding scale, right?
Up to one, yes.
So up to 130,000.
Right.
Correct?
At the $1 million mark.
And then if it's from 1 million to 1.5, is it not still 130,000?
Yes.
Okay. So it's up to 1.5. And then after that, then it starts to go.
It starts to go down for more expensive homes.
Got
so
it.
if you are purchasing a new build for more than 1.5, then I believe there's probably already a calculator online that can show you your rebate eligibility on those more expensive properties. And eventually it just disappears and you're back to the 24,000.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So now who's eligible for this?
Right. So to be eligible under the new housing rebate, you have to be occupying the property as your primary residence or an immediate family member has to occupy the property as their primary residence. And as far as I know, the legislation has never given a time frame exactly. So it's never said they have to live there for 12 months or, to keep the qualification. Mm-hmm. The idea is they're trying to incentivize, like through the rebate program historically, incentivize people to buy their own homes. So it's not necessarily an incentive for investors.
But I thought the new one was for investors.
Well,
or for anybody.
No, it's still, because it's under the new housing rebate criteria, they still have to meet the criteria of the new housing rebate, which specifies that it is for your primary residence or that of an immediate family member. So the separate rebate program, which we have currently, which is the new housing rental rebate program, I haven't heard of an expansion to the amount under that program. So the $24,000 is typically still available to investors who are going to rent the property out. The difference is they have to pay the $24,000 on closing, and then they apply for the rebate post-closing.
To get it back.
Okay. To get it back. And from my understanding, they have to send in, a copy of the lease and details to show that they did create a new rental unit in Ontario, which is also, generally a goal of the provincial government is to have, sufficient rental stock.
Right.
But this new increase to the HST refund and rebate, from what I understand currently, is only under the new housing rebate program.
Okay, so we'll have to look into that because I thought they said investors as well too. But I mean, look, again, it hasn't been passed yet, I don't believe.
Yeah, I don't know. You can't
At
really.
At least not to this date. And what's today? Today is what, April the 11th?
Yeah.
Something like that? Okay.
The 12th,
okay, so we're going to release this in a couple of days.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So from what I have heard, after the budget, then we'll get a bit more of the detail on the way the legislation operates.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, do they have a date set though, in regards to when this starts, even though it's not actually official yet? And when does it close? Because I do believe Doug Ford came out and gave us some dates. Yeah.
So I haven't heard any changes to the dates, and I doubt they could do that now because people have already entered into contracts on this basis. Mm-hmm. But it started April 1st and it should go to March 31st of next year. So the contract has to be signed during that period.
Got it.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the transaction has to close because they're new builds and they might be closing at a later date.
Okay. So walk me through this then. So let's say now I'm a buyer, first time home buyer. And I go up there with my agent to go look at a new build. Okay. And I was looking at this before, it was $900,000.
Yeah.
What happens? How does that let's say $1 million.
Right.
Because that way it's easier. So 130,000. How does that work? Does the price get lowered down to 870, or that's up to the builder to decide what they want to lower it down to?
Yeah. So I've only seen a few so far.
Okay.
And like all builder contracts, it's not like the ORIA agreement of purchase and sale where everybody uses the same, guts to the contract and they can amend them as needed. Every builder writes their own agreement of purchase and sale. They all are very similar for the most part.
Yep.
And over time, they get more and more similar. So I think, one builder will see how another builder is handling a new development and they'll say, oh, that works. That's very straightforward. And they'll sort of just get closer and closer to each other. But because this is so new, I have seen so far 2 different ways that builders are really dealing with it. So what it comes down to in terms of the differences are whether or not they are giving a purchase price inclusive of HST net of the rebate, which is what they've traditionally done. Mm-hmm. So that was the example where they would say the price is $900,000 plus $24,000, but we're going to get that from somebody else. So you pay $900 as long as you qualify. So in that version, they would write in their paragraph that the purchase price includes HST net of the rebate. And that is really, in this scenario where the builder doesn't have all the details, that is the builder kind of taking a risk because they don't know much about the process. But then at the same sense, they do know everything about the process because they've been dealing with the new housing rebate for so long. Mm-hmm. So if they write it that way, what it means is that, yes, the purchase price would show as $870,000. And that is what the buyer would use to do their mortgage and all of those things.
Right.
And then on closing, if everything goes the way it should, on the statement of adjustments, which is the builder's account, they'll do the same thing, but instead of showing the $24,000 charge and then the credit, they're going to show $130,000 charge and then the credit. So the net effect.
Then they get that rebate back.
Exactly.
From the government.
Yes, because the buyer already got it as a credit on the statement of adjustments.
Right, on the sale. That's why they're able to, right. Because I've talked to some developers and that's what they're doing. Like, okay, and now I'm able to actually lower the price of my inventory homes that I have.
Yeah.
And they're starting to see some traffic
interest
come
and movement and that sort of
into the showrooms.
Yeah. That's I'm sure one of the main goals is because if you're trying to incentivize builders and developers to continue to do this work, then, the fact that they have been sitting with inventory homes and having to lower prices from what they sold on paper years ago for the houses that didn't sell or houses that fell through, that's not a huge incentive to developers because now their balance sheets are not looking the same way they thought they would when they started the development. So the fact that the government is sort of stepping in to say, might act as a bit of a comfort to developers to say, okay, they do want to support us in the sense that if things take a turn, maybe there is some backup and some consideration of what we're sitting in.
Right.
So yeah, I think that the inventory homes, there's been a lot more interest. I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
People are definitely curious about the rebate. So yeah.
Now, is this only in Ontario? Have they gotten that far yet to say it's across Canada or just Ontario?
I'm not sure. So I know obviously the provincial government can only deal with the Ontario side. But obviously to get the full 13%, they need the cooperation of the federal government.
Yeah.
So I know they're cooperating here and that, both parties are in on this. I'm not sure how it's being handled elsewhere yet, though.
And so you're not sure if it's investors as well. So I guess go ahead.
Yeah, from what I have seen so far, all the language has been, like even on the Ontario website, all the language has been, this is an expansion to the new housing rebate. To me, that means you still, there was a little subnote that you still have to meet the criteria for the rebate.
Okay.
And that has not included rental properties.
Yeah, so we'll look into that then. So then what about buying it in a corporation's name?
Because you wouldn't meet the criteria for the new housing rebate.
It might fall into that category
exactly,
as well,
because a corporation can't occupy as a primary residence. So it would have sort of the same problem, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then do you think this is really more just to, well, actually, here's where I want to go with this. Do you think this is deflationary? I would think so.
Yeah.
Because if you were trying to sell your home or your new build for $900,000 and now you're getting that rebate, it's going to put more downward pressure on the price of homes.
I've been trying to think about that, but then, one of the questions I have, which I don't necessarily have an answer to, is when builders are pricing their homes. It's a different process.
Yep.
I know a lot of the time because they're pricing in inflation and things because it's not going to be ready for 1 to 3 years.
Yep.
But when they are selling their inventory homes, because the resale home down the street does not have to pay HST and remit it, but the builder does, are they always above market rate? So then if they're always above, the same 3-bedroom property in the same town, is this going to have a deflationary effect on resale homes? I don't know. Or does it just bring them down into direct competition with resale homes price-wise? And I just don't know that there is enough stock for that to have a direct deflationary effect on the resale market. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of, it's not apples to apples. So I'm not sure what we'll see there. Obviously, it's going to bring down the price of new builds.
Yeah.
But whether or not that will have a wider market impact, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I the way that I look at it, I would think that it would be deflationary.
Okay.
Yeah, but look, I'm not an expert, and I don't have a crystal ball. But if the prices of homes are going to be coming down for those new builds, if it also then is to incentivize developers to go up there and start building, because now they can actually lower the price of the new townhome or the new condo, that to me is deflationary.
Yeah. Right? And I don't know how I totally see that, but I don't know how the window of time is going to factor in.
Because it's only one,
because it's only one year. So are they going to treat it like an ongoing market pressure, or are they going to treat it like an anomaly? Mm-hmm. And really, all the homes are just worth what someone's willing to pay for them, which is what we've seen. Yeah. But I think it will be interesting to see if and how, and it's so hard to even see the ripple in the resale market, if any is created, because there's so many other pressures acting on the resale market that it's hard to attribute any change to one thing. Right. But it very well could have the effect that it impacts the resale market price-wise too.
Now, have you talked to any developers, or have you've seen some come across your desk as well too? You're saying
we more talk to their lawyers just because of like the nature of our part in the transaction. Yep. But there has been some mention that they're seeing more traffic into the sales centers, and more interest and more inquiries, and that's, I think, one of the goals of this whole situation. Yeah. So that's I think a positive, because as much as there's problems with every market segment, and nothing is going to be perfect, but the reality is we do need development. Yep. And if developers are not seeing it as profitable, and we're relying on private development to create housing in Ontario, then we have to make it worth their while somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any issues that we have to be, or like a buyer would have to be aware of, say, like after closing with this whole HST rebate? Like, can they just go ahead and turn around and sell it, or like you're saying, it falls underneath that?
Okay. So again, the goal of the program has always been to help people buy their home. Mm-hmm. So because that is the goal. And again, they've never given a precise timeline, but if a home is sold, for instance, in the first 12 months after being approved for the rebate, they are very likely to audit that application and say, well, you told us that this was to be your home, but now you're moving very quickly. We question your intention and if you were the right candidate for the rebate. Mm-hmm. And then there is a big onus on the home buyer to prove what their intention was at the time of purchase. Right. So from what we've been told by clients who have had to go through like that proof process, if there was a big material change in their life circumstances, they lost their job and could only find one in Calgary, or something to that effect, they very well might keep the rebate.
Okay.
But
so it'd have to be like a life event, or
it's a case by case basis assessment. Yeah. So we can never say for certain whether the rebate can be held onto. And so if the builder has given you the rebate as a credit, and then you disqualify yourself, and the builder now has to pay that HST, the builder will sue you. And it's very possible they will lien the house in the process of your sale, because they watch for it. Right. So they will have an eye on the neighborhoods and see what's for sale and all of that. We've seen it before where the builder puts on a lien and there's a sale coming up and it gets very hairy. Right. And the other thing I think people need to be aware of is, because they're sort of getting, these contracts are so new with this new expanded rebate, we are seeing a different wording of the contract, which is very technical. And I know that's not, what everybody necessarily, it's not fun, but it matters. So the other way I've seen the contract written now is that they will still price the house at $870, but they will say it's exclusive of HST. So rather than the way we've been seeing for many years, which is it includes HST net of the rebate, they're saying it's exclusive of HST. However, go on to say that if you qualify for the rebate, and if we're confident you qualify for the rebate, we may be willing to do it the old way, where we credit you on closing and we apply after the fact. But the worst case scenario for any buyer, I think, is to spook the builder into thinking you do not qualify. So if the builder has any inkling that you are misleading them in terms of your ability to qualify for the new housing rebate, they will pull the credit on closing. And this can happen at any time up until the date of closing.
Right.
So all of a sudden, you still have a charge for $130,000, but you no longer have a credit. And that doesn't mean you're not going to get it back. It means the builder is no longer willing to take the risk of giving you the credit because you've made them, oftentimes it's because they've become nervous about your intentions with this house.
Got it. Anything else that we need to cover on this HST rebate that is new, that's not yet quite in, passed yet, but is probably going to?
Yeah. Like, I think the concern is always, is there anything in this legislation that we don't know about?
Right.
Because we haven't read it.
So then what would your caution be for anybody that's thinking about doing a new build? Would you say hold off until it actually passes or go ahead?
I think that would be a hard caution to make because the provincial government has been so strong in their language.
Right, and doing
and because initially when I first heard the announcement, I was like, is this a brand new rebate program? Well, how does it work? What are the rules? But now that it's become very clear that no, it's not a new rebate. It's part of the new housing rebate program we already have. It's just we've really increased the amount you can get under that program. Mm-hmm. I think that's very comforting legally. Yeah. So, I don't even know how they would backtrack it now that they have been so clear in their messaging.
Yeah, I agree with you on that as well too. Like they've come up very strong and saying that this is what we need to do.
This is what's happening.
Yeah, and I think they need to.
Yeah, right? And if you sign after April 1st, we're giving you the confidence to rely on the new housing rebate increased rebate amount.
Right. And so then if you signed you bought a new build, say prior to April 1st, you probably just missed it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's unfortunate. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay. That would not be fun.
Well, look, we're almost near the end here. Okay. I got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes left here. Let's touch on just real quick what the first time home buyers rebate is and how does that work?
Yeah. So that one was introduced last year.
Okay.
So what we understand about that one, and again, I don't know that the legislation is readily available for that either. We have not seen builders reducing purchase prices based on that, likely because it's a brand new rebate program and they are not clear at this point on whether or not they can give a credit and claim it back the same way they can for the new housing rebate. So for instance, the new rental rebate, the buyer pays the HST and then they claim it after closing. So for the first time home buyer rebate, I don't think it's entirely clear if that's going to be how this one works or if the builder is going to be able to bill it and then give the credit on closing. So because there's not clarity there, the builders are not reducing the purchase prices. So what we're seeing on those contracts with first-time home buyers is they are still buying at full purchase, like previously to April 1st. Yeah. They were buying at the full purchase price with the understanding that eventually they will be able to apply to get the HST back.
And how much was that rebate approximately? Or was that a sliding scale as well?
From what I understand, it was very similar in amount to what they've done with the new housing rebate. However, the builder would still be entitled to the $24,000 new housing rebate. So potentially it's, $116,000 that might be available under the first time home buyer rebate. But that one is sort of under suspension during this 1 year because the HST is already going to go to the new housing rebate. Yep. So there's no HST left to claim under the first time home buyer. But when this expanded new housing rebate, assuming that they take it back after March 31st of next year, then the first time home buyer one is going to come back into, prominence.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, listen, Allison, appreciate your time and
thank you so much for having me.
About this HST rebate. What we're going to do, take a quick little break, and I want to jump back into what are some of the things that real estate agents and buyers need to be aware of before they go firm.
Okay.
This is a big issue.
That's a great topic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we'll be back in a minute.
All right. Awesome.